Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. So I asked you on Twitter what we should do with the Mental Health Book Club podcast in terms of episode length, and we had two options that came out top. One of those was as long as it takes, and the second one was for 30-minute episodes. So I am going to do a bit of a compromise. We will continue to do episodes for as long as it takes on each book. However, I will chop them up into 30-minute episodes. For those of you that would prefer the entire episode in one go, you can go over to Patreon by visiting patreon.com/MHBC and become a patron and supporting the podcast with as little as $2 a month. You will get the full episode every Monday. Once we reach $200 a month, we will then be able to pledge $50 a month to Mind the Mental Health charity on your behalf. So this is part one of The Clown and I by Ryan Heffernan, and on Wednesday you will get part two. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
And this is the 15th time that we've tried to record this introduction because Bertie the Rabbit has been causing mayhem. So, we are reading today Clown and I, Riding the Wildling Spirit, a bipolar memoir by Ryan Heffernan. And I have to say that is definitely a mouthful, and it took me a few tries to get it right.
I'm quite glad it's got a short title and
you wait
a long
until
title.
The big blurb comes along.
This book has 3 ratings, no reviews and 5 stars on Goodreads, 5 stars on Amazon. Sydney gave it 5 stars and I gave it 3, which might sound a bit controversial in that everyone else seems to have given it 5, but we'll talk about why later.
Yeah, so I think I know the reasons why you may have given it 3 stars, but we will get onto that. So perhaps you can share with us the book blurb.
The Clown and I is a dangerous, steamy and soulful memoir for Ryan Heffernan, a man with bipolar disorder. Ryan really should have lived in another time. International celebrities get sweaty and spanked, and life can be grandiose. But personal ruination forever lurks in this confronting exploration of how one man tries to fit in and make sense of the elusive real world, laced with love, lust, heartbreak, bad boozing and poverty. Clown and I is one-of-a-kind entry from a man in this genre. It is a dreamy and philosophical global odyssey, a diamond sparkle, spiritual and sensual insight into bipolar, stormy personal relationships and the hard street truths of dicey mental health in a society that won't always yield. But hope, beauty, dream chasing and Ryan's wondrous son are the undisputed emperors in this eccentric universe. This is One Little Boy Laid Bare.
So firstly, I wanted to say, without it sounding too patronising, because I'm conscious that it's probably going to sound extremely patronising, but it is fantastic that a man is being open about his struggles with his own mental health and discussions about his emotions.
Definitely. It's something that we haven't seen as much of.
I know that we've got the book by Matt Haig coming up soon, and there are some other books, but really the discussions of men's mental health is a lot less prevalent than it is for the women out there. They're much more, or they seem to be much more open to discussing it and writing about it. But again, I think that is just, again, the way that we expect things to happen, is that women are much more able to be open.
Yeah, we've had a few characters in the fictional books, but then written by women about these usually teenagers that are boys that have mental health issues, but still we haven't had their own accounts. So it was really nice and refreshing to read a man's point of view.
Definitely. And the other thing that I want to say is that in this book there is discussion about the fact that he was asked not to include his son throughout the book and in the story of Ryan's life. But I do think that it would be a major missing part to the story if he wasn't included.
Yeah.
I can understand why his mum would have reservations about him being part of the book.
Yeah.
Particularly because Ryan, he will be identifiable now, won't he? So because people will go, well, this is your son. And let's not beat about the bush. Some of the things that Ryan writes about are quite breathtaking because it's kind of shocking.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And you were then as I don't know how old he would be now. I'm guessing probably close to teenage years, if not a little younger. But he talks quite openly and frankly about his sexual escapades and his drug taking and his alcohol consumption and all of those things that, I don't know, as a child, you don't necessarily want to think about in your parent.
Because actually, before he wrote the book, he had the blog about being a father with mental health issues. But not having read his blog, I wonder if it went into as much detail, because his ex-partner didn't seem to have as much of an issue with that as she did the book.
I do wonder. I think maybe, I don't know, I think we should check the blog out, but I think maybe the blog was more about how to be a parent and deal with the mental health issues and the child at the same time, rather than things that have happened.
I think you're right. There would have been a big gap in the book if he hadn't been involved.
And I do think that one of the main reasons that Ryan is able to continually fight against his mental health issue, which in this case is the diagnosis of bipolar 2, is through having his son as that kind of shining light to work for.
He talks about, times when he wanted to commit suicide, and it's the one thing that brought him back. It's the one thing that pulled him out. And he did struggle to put him in chapters that were that dark. He said, he's so pure, he shouldn't be in there, but actually he's what pulled me back.
Exactly.
And I think the honesty in there is, really important.
The one thing that I in some ways worry about is, what about, I know that in his case he had his son and he was the reason why he didn't necessarily go through with some of the things that he was thinking about, is what happens for people who have a similar diagnosis and don't have that kind of point of focus, if that makes sense. So he was very focused on the fact that he didn't want to commit suicide because he didn't want to leave his son behind. But if you were someone who didn't have any dependent people on you...
Or taking it a different way, I think there are times when he wondered whether his diagnosis and the actions he was doing were detrimental. And if you thought that all your actions were detrimental to your son or daughter, then this story could have had a very different ending.
Oh, definitely. It could have gone completely different, couldn't it?
I think he's very lucky that he's got a partner, or an ex-partner, who's very understanding.
Definitely.
And actually is able to pick up the slack and things like that when he was having trouble, and was able to understand what was going on. Because otherwise I couldn't, if he had him with him when he was having these episodes.
Particularly when Ryan was in one of his manic episodes, and the way he describes them so vividly, because I haven't experienced bipolar disorder or anything similar to these manic episodes, I thought that was really insightful, just how difficult those times would be when there is this, in some ways, inability to be able to control how you're feeling and what you're seeing, because he talks about how everything starts to become brighter, and he obviously has this energy where it's just constant and
unable to control that. He is, even when he's taking the medication and he's living right and he's trying to do his best, he still has these episodes that he can't control, where he feels like the world is suddenly brighter and more gorgeous, and he gets really creative.
Something in his head, doesn't he? He's like, right, I am going to go and buy a sewing machine because I want to make clothes for myself. And that's probably
any sewing machine. No. It has to be a Singer, it has to be the old-fashioned, it has to be manual, and he has to get someone to show him how to use it. He ends up spending more money because the woman's going to help him.
And he travels to go and get it.
Yeah, and he spends like a day there with her, and then he never touches it.
Yeah, it just sits collecting dust.
But he had this idea, and it's
that he wanted it.
Because it's so impulsive.
It's like, I must do this right now. And in some ways, that is probably the least...
Well, it's not a dangerous...
That's what I mean.
Way of those impulses taking themselves. Yeah. This is why bipolar patients are often associated with drug taking, recreational, sexual encounters, all of those things, because often, which can, be dangerous, and therefore, they put themselves in a risky position. And not because, and he says this, it's not because he's not scared, it's because the impulse takes over and he just does it anyway. And he sort of pushes through the fear and does it. And I was really impressed at the descriptions of how his body felt, how his mind was feeling. And so sort of like you could really start to imagine what it felt like for him, which I had never been able to do before.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've had times where I've gone on spending sprees because of the impulsivity associated with borderline personality disorder, but I definitely don't think it was anywhere near as intense as what Ryan is describing in his book. I mean, again, another point is that he has lost his job, he's not working, he's not got a regular income, but he decides all of a sudden that that's it, I must go and get a new look, and he goes and dyes his hair, and he buys all these clothes, and he then ends up calling himself the British mod cowboy look, and you're like, that is an interesting look. And you go, but he had to have these cowboy boots that were $450.
And what I thought was interesting is when he talks about how he would often be with somebody, a partner, and he got these moments where he was in these manic episodes, and this was before he was diagnosed and even realised, and he'd look at his partner and suddenly realise that they were looking at him as if they didn't know who he was. And yet when he is diagnosed, he goes through a crisis of he doesn't know which bits are him and which bits are his diagnosis. And of course it is both. But when you are diagnosed with something like this, you do wonder what's you and what's your diagnosis.
Condition as such. Definitely.
So you don't want to be your condition, but at the same time, it is part of his character. It's part of his uniqueness.
Definitely.
In the way that he has and deals with his bipolar.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if it was taken away from him, would he still be the same Ryan, if that makes sense? Would he still be that creative? Because obviously he gets points where he becomes really creative when he is in a manic episode, and like much more than maybe
which
he
is why he
be.
Turns around and says a lot of people who are sort of celebrities or in the creative area, there are a whole list of people, and he has pages in his book of lists of these famous people who possibly, because there wasn't always a diagnosis, but possibly had bipolar, and because of their behaviour, that's what they think it might have been now. And so you look back at this list and you think, well, there's some of the most creative and inspirational people, and at their most creative it was wonderful, but at their lowest it must, when you're not controlling it, and even then when he is trying to control it, it's uncontrollable, it seems. And so you can see why a lot of them end up dying young. And he says this is because, it's got a higher rate of suicide than the average person, and partly he says that's because of, it is so uncontrollable.
And the fact that there's also the horrendous side effects associated with some of the mood stabilising medications that you take as a result of trying to control that behaviour and control the mood and stabilise the bipolar. And there's also times in the book where he talks about when he ends up in what is described as the bipolar depression part of the condition, and he ends up in hospital, and hospitalisation of him needing to be watched by someone to make sure he didn't hurt himself, and how he then bonds with people on the unit and stuff. And just in some ways, I don't know, I felt like when he was talking about that, you could in some ways feel like he felt like a failure. Yeah. Like he had failed in being able to control his condition.
Well, this actually, when I was reading this, I don't know if someone noticed my tweet, but I was...
you did tweet. Yeah.
I was thinking about this, and as a teacher, we're always telling the students how they are the creators of their own future. They're the ones that can do whatever they put their mind to. But as we know, some things are given to you, and you have to deal with it, and you have no control over it. As a fibromyalgia patient, I've got no control over whether I'm going to
get up the next day without being in so much pain that it's hard to lift your pen.
Yeah. Or am I going to have a migraine or not? And, some of it's weather dependent, which none of us can control.
And let's be honest, the UK weather is hit and miss at the best of times.
I mean, at the moment it's getting hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, and my body just can't cope. So I'm in pain most of the time. And even when I've upped my meds, I'm still in pain.
In comparison, when I get into you find heat is beneficial to you. Whereas for my MS, as soon as it gets hot, the fatigue is so much worse that I end up staying in bed inside in the cold, trying to stay as cool as possible because I can't deal with the heat. So it's kind of like this catch-22. No matter what we do, we're kind of...
But you're told that, we are the makers of our future. And if we can't be successful in the eyes of what the world sees as success, then we're a failure.
Oh, definitely.
So often, the days when I feel I can't move and I can't get out of bed, I feel like that is my fault. And it's not. It's my condition. Just like for him, it is his condition is the reason that he can't get out of bed sometimes, and that he's failed at a lot of jobs and ended up having to leave and things like that. It's his condition. But you do feel like a failure.
And the fact that you feel like society is judging you, and let's be honest, they are judging you. I mean, I know that because I don't have a regular 9-to-5 job, that particularly from family members, they are judging me, and for example, my grandma is constantly trying to get me to have a job or do something with my life. And I'm like, well, it would be fantastic if I could get up every day and do a job. But when there are mornings when I can't get out of bed because I'm that tired, that, let's put it this way, for people that haven't ever suffered fatigue before, when someone says to you they're tired and they have a condition such as MS or fibromyalgia, it's not just the fact that you haven't slept at night and you're feeling a bit run down. No, this is, I've got out of bed, I've gone to the shower, I've stood in the shower for 5 minutes, and now I'm so exhausted I have to get back into bed and go to sleep. It's not normal tiredness, and they don't understand that.
And people try and be nice, and they'll go, oh, have you not slept then if you say you're tired? And I go, yeah, no, actually,
I had 10 hours and I still feel like
well, maybe you slept too much, because that can have an effect as well. Yeah, and you're just like, well, actually, I do my best and I have to do, and I feel judged at work. I had to, I have to justify my sickness. I have to go through whole procedures about, occupational health and all this kind of stuff to prove. And recently a promotion's come up, and I'm pretty sure that within my job, they know my sickness record, and they wouldn't usually if you're applying for a job outside. And that does concern me, that people, they won't ever tell me that's the reason they don't give me a job, for example.
Because they're not allowed, because in the UK there are these anti-discrimination laws. However, in the back of their head, in the back of their head, you can't help but think or know that they are considering the fact that you have this high sickness record.
Even though I am good at my job, and when I'm there, I am there, and I'm 100% there. But when I'm having a bad day, or I'm in the middle of a migraine and I can't get to work, and that is happening, on a regular basis, especially with the extra cold weather we've had this winter. I've had a particularly bad...
Having issues with the snow was ridiculous.
And, and there's snow predicted again for Monday. And
I know, which is crazy.
God, we're in May now. And there's my, me worrying about whether am I going to be able to go to work on Monday.
Because it'll be that cold and you'll be in that much pain.
Yeah.
It's also the fact that you have people that then also judge you for needing to take medication, such as painkillers.
You're right. The amount of people that tell me, oh, I try not to take painkillers when I'm in pain. Otherwise, and otherwise I get used to them. And, oh, aren't you getting used to them? Is that, well, they won't work eventually. And what about your liver? Well, actually, paracetamol is the least of my issues when it comes to my liver, with all the other medications I have to take. But you can't, people do without realising it. And some of it does come from concern, but it's just, done in the wrong way.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just interesting. It interests me that in some ways when people say, or you say to people that you have this condition, that there are these automatic assumptions, and everyone in some ways becomes the health professional doctor that has like all this insight
or a Google
into
doctor.
Everything. Yeah, exactly. But then I guess maybe are we doing that in some ways because we are trying to better understand different mental health conditions?
I think there's a difference between trying to understand and judging people. I would never judge him for the way he lived his life and what he did. And actually, I think I have more compassion for people with bipolar after reading this story.
Oh, definitely.
Because I have a better understanding of it. Like, for example, the sort of stereotypical idea around bipolar is that one day you're up, the next day you're down. Or even within a conversation, you can flip from one to the other. And I've noticed that even around school, people use bipolar in that,
you're so bipolar today. What?
Yeah, because, or then they talk about girls who, I've heard some of the teenage boys talking about girls and they go, I think she's got bipolar or something because she was always on at me. And you're just like, well, actually, it's probably not. And it's our concept of actually bipolar is suddenly up and suddenly down. Whereas actually it's not. And he has, months without having any kind of episode, manic or depressive. But then he can go through a depressive episode or a manic episode that can last months as well.
Yeah. I also think that in some ways with this issue with the ups and downs of bipolar is that most people, or at least people, will probably understand and recognise the depression part of the condition better than they do the manic part. Because, I didn't realise how extreme those feelings become when you are manic, and just how much you have issues with sleep and you have issues with this constant energy and you have these impulses and you act on these impulses. I didn't really understand that part of the condition.
I think especially as from the outside, sometimes it would just look like he was going, on a bit of a...
He's going on a bender again.
Yeah. And some people might see it as actually, like when the boys go away for a holiday and that typical,
lads mentality.
Yeah, like the Hangover film kind of thing. That actually he was going on a bit of a hangover version of the film, and And
he was
actually,
doing the
that
drink,
was
the
it.
drugs, the sex,
and you don't necessarily associate that with he's doing that because of a mental health issue that's causing him to be impulsive. You know, some people do that because that's what they want to do.
And I don't think in either way we should necessarily judge them for doing that. And I do think it is really refreshing that he talks so openly about it. I know that you had some concerns or some issues, which is why you probably downrated the book.
I think I just found it very repetitive in places. You know, he told us about, you know, one holiday bender and then another holiday bender. And to me, I was like, well, I probably only need one story to understand this.
Whereas from my perspective, because bipolar is this cyclic behaviour, I think that if he had only given you one example of these events, you wouldn't have understood that it's a case of this stuff repeats itself. And imagine if you are going through this constant change of 1 minute you're having this impulsive bender, taking drugs and ending up in, I think he talks about ending up with these guys that are in a random house and he doesn't know who they are. But imagine how scary that must be to all of a sudden you come back to yourself and you're like, I don't know who these guys are.
Don't know how I got here.
I don't know what's going on.
I think
and I know he goes on about that quite a lot, but
it's been his life for a good 30, 40 years before he understands it.
Exactly. Imagine that is your life.
Yeah.
And I think that is another criticism that I can say about different books, is that they don't necessarily hone into that reality.
Yeah.
I think that if he'd only given you one example of each, yes, I understand that it got a bit repetitive, but that is his life. He has this constant repeat.
Yeah. The other issue I had was there was a random part of, I say random, I'm sure it was very well planned, but to me it seemed very random, a section of the book that suddenly went into italics and had a whole story about a sexual experience. And it got very blurry as to what was real and what was in his head and what would actually happen and what hadn't. And I didn't really see the point in that bit.
And I'm going to, again, challenge this. See, this is
why we do
thing.
it.
Yeah, and I'm going to challenge this is because if you were in a manic episode, you're going to have those blurred lines, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to be able to identify what is considered the normality and what is something that may be playing out in your head. I think it gives you, again, a bit more insight into what goes through his mind when he's in a manic episode.
He doesn't necessarily explain that
that's
in the reason it's in the book or the reason that it's there.
No, but that's what I took away.
He doesn't reflect on it, and I think maybe that's what I didn't quite understand.
So you would say that maybe having some kind of caveat in there to say that this is what this is. Whereas I don't know, maybe it's just because I read quite a bit into it first, and I was like, well, this is obviously an episode that he's having, and it in some ways is just like a diary entry of what he went through at that time.
Yeah. I did actually like it more nearer the end when he was more reflective of sort of reflective on the book, reflective on his experiences, and saying that, you know, this isn't necessarily the bipolar account because
or a self-help guide of how to deal with bipolar or anything like that.
It's just his journey, and I think that's important because actually, you know, even though we're trying to we feel we know a bit more about it, actually everyone's experience of this would be different.
Exactly.
And he says partly his lifestyle and his career choice and everything played into his condition and everything. What I found really touching was the friends that helped him near the end of the book when his family
took him into their house and stuff.
His family were like pushing his way. His partner wanted him to go into hospital, and they go to take him to hospital, but actually they go, well, what would you do if you were anywhere in the world? And they were like, just hang out with you guys. And that's what they do. They take him home and they look after him, and he becomes one of their family, really, with their children there and everything. And I found that really touching because
we all need people like this in our lives. Can I just say, in some ways you kind of look at this adoptive family and they are kind of lifesavers to him, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are this, there's no judgment there. There is no demands on what he should be doing or how he should be doing it. He just needed someone to be around him at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's more touching for someone like myself who actually needs that as well. I don't have the most supportive family, and so my friends become the support system that I need, and you do have to pick and choose which friends you know actually do rely on because they are friends, they're not obligated. But I I'm very lucky to have those. And I could see that he was almost surprised about it, but actually
very grateful as well.
Yeah.
It's not like he took them for granted either.
No.
Just the way he describes the situation, you can
and it must have been hard to
Yeah.
accept the help at first.
Oh, definitely. Particularly, again, it's going to sound like I'm being patronising. I don't want it to sound like I'm being patronising, but often I think men find it more difficult to ask for what they need.
Yeah.
And accept that help when, again, they need it.
Yeah.
It's not like it's something that he is taking just for granted. And that's the bit that I get, that gets to me.
I also think it was the fact that even around their young children, they were never worried.
Bothered.
They accepted him. They never saw him as dangerous or corruptive to their children, and as a lot of other people would have done. And so I found that really refreshing, that he was able to, it was a good example of actually, just because you're around someone with mental health doesn't mean you're going to get mental health. Just because you have someone with mental health issues around you doesn't mean that they're dangerous, doesn't mean they're going to hurt you or your children or anything like that.
And also the discussions that they have with the children and him. I mean, he is able to explain himself to them without them judging him. And I think they're going to have a better understanding later on when or if they come across someone with bipolar disorder.
Yeah. And I just thought it was really, that family, where whoever you are out there, I think it was a wonderful gesture, and I think it was a beautiful thing to read about.
Definitely. So the one thing that, again, I found extremely interesting is whilst at the very beginning of the book he's going through being diagnosed with bipolar, he has gone to a therapist who is talking to him, and because he is feeling depressed, and she starts to see the pattern forming of this cyclic behaviour of these manic episodes and these periods of depression, and she goes to Ryan, I think you have bipolar. I need to refer you on to a psychiatrist and we'll get this properly diagnosed. And when she says that, his response to her is, well, I don't think I'm God or anything.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to me, he's got his own preconceived ideas about bipolar disorder, and in some ways he has some stigma attached to bipolar. So one of the symptoms is that you have this feeling of grandiosity, and that could mean that, for example, I am sat here and I think that I am extremely important because I'm the Queen and you need to make me tea and give me biscuits. I'm not saying that that's all the Queen does, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's
this
that feeling
importance and being...
And being the best at something, and that you feel you're really good at this, and that the world is going your way and everything is great.
Yeah, and so that statement of, well, I don't think I'm God or anything, kind of shows that he has his own stigma, probably because of the things that he has heard before getting this diagnosis.
Well, yeah, because actually when I was reading it, I was going, really? That's not what if I heard
someone has bipolar
or someone said to me, I think you've got bipolar, I wouldn't immediately go to the God complex. I would go to, but I don't have extremes of emotion in a day or something like that. Or I would have done before reading this book. But whereas he, goes straight to the God complex. But it does, shows he's got his own stereotypes around it, and he's got his own preconceived ideas, and almost he's got his own self-diagnosis about himself before he's gone into and, seeing what they're doing.
And again, I think it's quite telling of this misconception that the public at large has. I mean, you said that you had this automatic thought that it was this constant kind of cyclic behaviour of like going through highs and lows in a day.
Yeah.
See, where in some ways, I knew about the mania, I knew about the depression, okay? I didn't necessarily know about the lengths of time that it would last for.
Yeah.
But for me, I didn't really fully understand the mania part. And the grandiosity didn't jump to my head straight away either.
No. And I thought it was interesting when he describes about the feelings of everything going his way and everything being great, and the idea that there was some kind of plan and how everything was coming together and it was like fated, and that would lead him to do things because he thought there was a sign that he should do something. And again, that being part of the diagnosis and the mania that he was experiencing, which I didn't realise that was part of it as well.
So this is part 1 of The Clown and I by Ryan Heffernan, and on Wednesday, part 2.
In the meantime, just remember,
it's okay not to be okay.
And if you're not okay, talk. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline.
And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next book will be Birth of a New Brain, Healing from Postpartum Bipolar Disorder by Diane Harwood. And our next episode with The Secret Psychiatrist will be about postpartum bipolar disorder. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.